G'day and welcome to the Genre Fiction Podcast. I'm Jack Roney.
And I'm Harry Culver.
And Harry, in this episode, we're introducing Brisbane-based author Diane Clarke. Diane is the author of her debut novel, The Photograph, and her soon-to-be released second novel, The Bracelet. So, Diane, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
So we've got a lot of stuff to get through. So to kick us underway, or to kick us off, let's talk about your first published book, The Photograph. So I haven't yet read it. It's on my to read list, but I understand it's sort of a historical novel set from the onset of World War II, based in London in 1939. But also, I understand there's components told in present day as well, which I'm keen to find out more about how you've sort of done that. So, can you first of all just talk us through what's your kind of your elevator pitch? Talk us through the plot of your novel. I understand it's centered around a missing boy that sort of went missing during wartime evacuations, and the discovery of an old photograph in a teddy bear. So, tell us about it.
Right, that's right. So the story is, I guess it's a quest. It's a quest for my main character, Carol. She believes she lost her brother during the wartime evacuations of London at the beginning of World War II, but we actually don't meet her until she's in her 50s. And she's at her mother's house and she finds a teddy bear, and in the back is a photograph of her on a station platform surrounded by other people. Her birth mother is there. When I say she's with her mother, this is an adopted mother. Her birth mother's in the photograph, and there's this mystery boy. And it's the first piece of evidence that she's ever had that this boy existed, because everyone has told her through her life that she didn't have one, that she didn't arrive with a brother. Um, Her birth mother died very, very soon after she was evacuated to the countryside, so she didn't have family to ask. But she's always had this sense that, this boy was part of her life, and she's tried to find him. She's looked in records, hasn't been able to, but the photograph really sets her off on this journey again to try and unravel the truth about him. um, and so that leads her on various adventures. And then the timeline moves forward to 2020, and it's her daughter who is helping her at that stage. And Megan has an advantage because she's just taken a job with a society that supports former evacuees. And that society is based on a real one that exists in the UK. And so the stories of evacuees, the historical element of the book, comes through in that timeline because Megan is reading their stories. The charity encourages people to write in and share their experience of being evacuated. And so she discusses that with her work colleagues and her family. And so you get those stories in that second part of the book. And the reason that we brought it forward in time to that point was and made COVID the backdrop of that second timeline was the parallels really, in terms of separation from family, in the same way that the children had been separated from their families during the war years. And also just, how scared everyone was of death at that time, both during the war and during COVID. So it seemed like a really good place to set the second part of the book. So it is historical in the sense that you get to hear about those stories, but the two timelines are actually 1995 and then 2020. So it's yeah, I'm never sure. I'm never sure whether I want to talk about it as historical really. But I guess there is that important element to it.
Where were the children, or where was she sort of evacuated to during the war?
She goes to North Wales.
All right, okay.
Um,
Because the reason I'm asking is my dad was evacuated to Ireland, so he ended up in Ireland for the war.
okay,
Yeah, and my
okay.
mum's from North Wales as well, so she probably didn't need evacuating.
I mean, the children went all over, as I'm sure
Yeah.
you know. I mean, anywhere basically away from those big industrial cities, London being the largest, of course, that were considered possible targets for bombing raids. And of
Mm.
course, London was dreadfully bombed. So, yes, yeah.
I find that really interesting. You talked about the parallels of COVID and concerns and fears in present day versus wartime. Was that something that you added on to your story as an extra layer later? I understand that you might have had some earlier drafts of the manuscript. So did that additional layer of the relevance of COVID come later as you say, with some discussions with your publisher and editor as a way to sort of add strength to the story?
Yes, definitely. In the original draft, the person that helped Carol, it was all part of a single timeline, and it was actually someone working at the society that wasn't related to her in any way. Um, and when I first had the benefit of a professional editor looking at the story at that sort of you know bird's eye view, her feeling was that it would be much more impactful if the person helping her was a family member. And so we decided it would be a daughter, and I mean, you're constantly playing around with a calculator and dates of birth. I
Mm.
mean, obviously you can't change the dates of the war, and um, Carol couldn't be too old, and so it was all of that juggling. But then we realized it was possible to set it in the COVID era, and the parallels that then just jumped out at us. So we grabbed it
Mm.
with both hands.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the whole topic of COVID and whether people are writing about it. I think there was probably, I got the feeling that people were just sick of talking about COVID. And that as a result, we're not seeing, well, I haven't really seen a lot of kind of pandemic COVID related stories. It was almost like people were intentionally not touching the subject because we are just sick of it. But it's really interesting that you've done that you've really made it contemporary by addressing those real life issues and particularly, as you said, the fears of people in modern day and how that links back to sort of fears during the war. That's a really interesting link that you've done that.
Yes, and I was very conscious that I didn't want the backdrop to overtake what was happening in that part of the story, and I very deliberately didn't have anybody pass away as a result of COVID. There was enough in the story um, to it, not add another sad element to it, I suppose.
Mm,
Um, One of Megan's daughters is a nurse too, which allowed. And Carol's husband is a pharmacist. And so, between the husband and the granddaughter of Carol, who is now elderly, there were lots of people there to look after her and make sure they all followed the rules, and that they were really up to date with all the information and guidelines and things. So yes, I didn't want to actually incorporate death into that second timeline, but it was um, an interesting period
mm.
to for a family um, to live through and juggle their lives at that point.
You're in good company because Michael Connolly mentioned COVID a few times in some of his books. So
Right.
it's like sort of he used it as a sort of way of maintaining the sort of like because obviously his characters have been going on for so many books. it gives a sort of added touch of reality, and that the readership are growing and getting old with the characters, and sort of gives it a bit of a tie into reality, which is quite nice.
Yes, yes, that's right. And I try to do that as well. So, you know, the politics of the time and things like that. Um, just to orientate the story
Yeah.
into those time periods as much as I can.
Mm.
I've mentioned before, but I always originally, when I did my Jono series, there were supposed to be 5 books, and the fourth one was supposed to be how utterly unprepared for a pandemic or an epidemic the ambulance service were, and obviously before I got to write it, COVID happened, and then it was just like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to do that one. I get in way
Mm.
too much trouble.
Oh my goodness.
Anyway,
Oh my, I mean, who would have thought? Who would have thought that?
actually, several people did think and did
Well,
warn and made. There's a 2002 paper published warning about coronaviruses
yeah,
and their potential for a pandemic.
yeah,
So yeah, people did know, but nobody did anything about it until the
mm,
proverbial hit the fan. So
yeah, yeah.
So, Diane, I'm really interested in how you actually structured your story. Obviously, when people are tackling different timelines, there's different ways of doing it. I, I take the point that it's not a historical novel per se, in that the story isn't being told during World War II, but it's more reflective. There's
Mm.
two timelines in the 1990s, I think 1995 and 2020. So
Yeah.
it's still 25 years apart. So how did you tackle that? Is your storyline linear? Or do you alternate between timelines in some way? Or have you broken up the book into different timeline sort of sections?
They're linear within their parts. So all of part one is 1995, and all of part two is 2020. And then there is a part three also in 2020. And just to explain that, so part one is Carol's point of view. Part two is Megan's point of view. And then part three, which is also in Carol, goes back to Carol's point of view, is also in 2020. But a continuation of where the family are
mhm.
from Megan's story, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But we flipped it back to Carol at the end of the story, because there's obviously the sort of the resolution, the tying up, and we really felt that Carol needed to have the ownership of that last part. So we flipped it back to her.
Okay. So we're not going to do any spoilers, but can we move on to your second book that's due for release very shortly, called The Bracelet, which I understand is more of a family drama with a bit of a murder mystery thrown in. Can you tell us about The Bracelet?
Yeah, so the the main this is also a kind of a quest story too. My main character in this book is a woman called Monica. We meet her in her sort of mid to late 30s, and she has an absent father essentially. She's pretty sure she knows who her father is, but no one in her family would ever give her a name. But she's kind of worked it out along the way from little bits and pieces that she's heard. Um, and you might question, well, a woman in her 30s, why on earth hasn't she reached out to him herself? But there's a traumatic event in her past which is connected to this man, and that has prevented her from making contact with him. But very early on in the book, her grandmother dies, and there's a funeral, and this man turns up, and she hasn't seen him in years. Um, One of the friends of the family actually sends him away, doesn't allow him to come into the funeral and talk to people, but Monica sees him, and it makes her reconsider the decision that she's always made, that she wasn't, so she didn't have the courage really to contact him. And so again, it starts her on this quest of trying to um, make contact and build a relationship with a man that has never been in her life. So that's the basic story. But there's other hurdles along the way, and another really important one is what happens to her mother. Her mother's behavior starts to alter, and she starts getting forgetful. And it's during that sort of forgetfulness that she gives Monica a bracelet. And the origins of the bracelet are another difficulty or a mystery that Monica needs to solve.
I sense from your stories that there's a real strong leaning towards, a quest to unravel family secrets and mysteries, and I can just tell by the way you're describing the stories that it's the sort of stuff that you really enjoy writing. Would that be a fair comment to make, that it's the themes, underlying themes, are quite strongly family secrets and uncovering
Yes.
uncovering hidden lies, or not so
Yeah,
much lies but mysteries?
well, definitely. And that quest for identity, I suppose. I mean, Carol is looking for her family roots, and whether this brother exists, and Monica is looking for a father, her father, and wanting to get to know um, the family that he's created, along the way. So yes, it's that and the secrets and the lies that underpin the reasons why those two women are not fulfilled at the start of the stories, and why they go looking, why they go searching.
And what appeals to you about writing those sort of stories? Are they the sort of stories that you enjoy yourself as a reader?
I think so. Yes, I think so. I love mysteries. I've read a lot of crime too, but I don't feel confident to um, get into the crime stuff really. So these sorts of stories around family and family mysteries, I feel much more confident to be able to write about, and particularly stories that take a female perspective. I mean, all my books have all my two books have strong female leads, and often are supported by other women to help unravel the mysteries that they are dealing with. Um, so so yes, I guess that it feels like the right path for me.
I can definitely resonate with that. Just a bit of a story from a personal side. We discovered that I had an auntie that we didn't know existed. My father, he passed away a number of years ago. He was elderly, and he come from a very big family of himself and seven siblings. Um, and when the adoption rules changed and people could seek out their birth family, we received notification that this woman, who was my father's sister, was trying to find her birth family. But what was of really strong interest, was that, again, this was a family where there were already eight children in the family, and this was the ninth child who the other eight siblings knew nothing about. She was born in between. It's the kids. So it's not like she was an early child or a child that came late. She was actually born in between other siblings. And the story goes, what we're able to uncover is, um, this is quite his. I'm not sure when this would probably be around the 1930s, I think. Um, when she was born, I believe that my grandmother was at home looking after the family on the family farm, and her husband, my grandfather, was away working, and that was a period where men would go away for long periods, like 12, 18 months. And
Mm.
in that interim, she fell pregnant, and we seem to believe that she fell pregnant to his brother. Um,
Right.
so in the time when, birth outside the marital arrangement was very much frowned upon,
Mm.
it's more likely, and we were never able to get the real answers to this because this secret was discovered well after the mother had passed away. But the best we can piece together is that that was the reason for adopting out her child, because she'd fallen pregnant to another man while her husband was away working, and all indications are nobody knew about it, not even her own husband, and none of the other children knew about it. It was whether she, there was also a time when women, where young unmarried women would go away for a
Yes.
while, and they'd get taken away, and they'd have their baby, and be forced to adopt their child because they were unwed mothers. And we
Mm.
feel it was something like that. And I've often thought that would make a really interesting pretense to a story, that type of family mystery. So I can certainly resonate with the type of stories that you're writing.
Mm.
Let's get into your historical research.
Yes.
So, how do you do that? So that I'm assuming that particularly your novel, The Photograph, when there's references to World War II and the evacuations and things that actually took place, how did you weave factual events with a fictional story?
Well, as I mentioned, in the end, the stories of the evacuees were woven into Megan's work, essentially. And and often in discussion with other people. So Megan would be discussing letters that she'd read that day with a work colleague, or it would be with her husband when she got home at night, or something along those lines. But those stories are all based on real accounts that I've come across. I mean, fortunately, the web is a treasure trove of information. There's lots of factual information about the evacuations on two main websites. So the National Archives and the Imperial War Museum website. So that those are the places that I found all the photographs, because it was really looking at those photographs that made me wonder about this idea of a child going missing. Because if you've ever seen any of the evacuations, the train stations are just chaos. There's people, there's adults and children everywhere. The children were actually taken in school groups. It was organized through the schools. So teachers would be holding up banners for a particular school or a particular class, and they'd have all their children around them, butting up against another school. And I mean, honestly, the chances of a child going missing to me seemed, quite realistic. But yet at the same time, I never did actually come across any evidence that that happened regularly. At least I came across one anecdotal story of someone saying he never saw his siblings again, but it's only one. And there are websites. There's a Facebook group. There's the British Evacuees Association Facebook group. People put stories up on there. They have a magazine. I'm a member of that organization now. So uh, um, everything that's in the book is based on something that I read about, because the stories are very mixed. Some children were incredibly well looked after. Other children really weren't at all. And then you have stories of perhaps the older boys who were often um, chosen, and that was an awful thing. They lined kids up in village halls, and people went down the line and chose the children that they were going to look after. But a lot of the teenage boys were given work on farms, for example, and for a lot of them, they loved it. They loved the fresh air, and because London was an incredibly crowded and dirty, unhygienic place, at that time. So
Hasn't changed much.
yeah, so it's a very mixed bag of experiences for children. And as I said, I don't shy away from that. So some of the stories that, as I said, Megan shares with work colleagues or family, some are good and some aren't.
Sorry, I
Nope.
muted my mic. It's certainly conceivable, isn't it, that children could have gone missing in those days, particularly young children who weren't able to speak for themselves if they were separated and suddenly paperwork went missing. There would have been no electronic trail
No,
following the movements, and
no.
suddenly in the chaos, people might not know who does the child belong to, and yeah, you can certainly see it's certainly a what if question. So I really, again, I love how you weave that idea and that notion of what if, and then you turn that into a story. Um, can you just on that before we move on? What were the first seeds of the story idea? What was it? Was it this idea of this old photograph and this, and sort of concealed in a teddy bear? Where did the story first spawn? The idea?
Well, it actually is something else altogether. I watched a really quite grueling documentary about twins, and one of the brothers had a motorcycle accident in his teenage years and lost all his childhood memories. And the twin filled in his childhood for him, and they would sit and talk about it and look at photos and one thing and another. But then they came across a photo that was really odd. There was something really odd about this photo, and the one without who'd lost his memories still had this sense that this photo was important in some way. That there was some sort of, again, a dark secret really around it, and discovered that the twin who'd been helping had kept this secret from him because he didn't want to burden him with it, and equally he didn't want to have to relive it himself by telling the story. And so there was the element of memory I found really fascinating. um, and obviously in this case it's a young child, because again with memory, what do we really remember when we're young, and what do we think we remember because that's what we've been told?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so of course, as I said, I didn't use an adult. I ended up using a child, but it was still that idea of memory and how far we can trust our memories. Um, and as I said, going back to the documentary and the brothers, it was a photograph that kicked off that revelation. And so, I was quite taken with that idea as well. And the whole evacuation element to it. My parents were adults during the war years, and often talked about stuff to do with the war, which included the evacuations. And I was quite fascinated by it. I thought that being evacuated would be a huge adventure, and probably still did until I started researching and
Mm.
discovered that for a lot of children it was not a nice adventure at all. So I think it was all of those things that kind of coalesced around this story about Carol and her missing brother.
It just occurred to me, what the first Narnia story, what's the Narnia and the wardrobe and the
Lion the Witch, the Wardrobe.
thank you. Yeah, that was set in similar circumstances. Kids are on evacuation and they were with this eccentric person, and hence the adventure.